YouTube can do together.
I believe.
That's good. It does look good.
Well, that has to do with you. It's not coming from me.
Yes, it seems to work. It seems
All right.
to work. Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Yes, we are live, I guess. We are alive, that's for sure. I guess people can see us from now on. Here. And now we
Oh yeah, a little behind. That's
a
cool.
little behind. I just switched that off. And you're online. That's great.
Cool.
So
Thank you for having me. Woo!
yeah. Hello,
Super
Robert
cool.
Rodgers. Hello,
Hello.
Robert.
Hello.
Glad that you are with us at the Liber Ligue d'Impro de Berlin. Thank you.
I'm
very
honored.
much. Yeah.
Honored.
We're very happy to have you here. We'll do an interview with you, 20 minutes, just the two of us. And then
Okay.
all the members of the Liber are there too. So
Cool.
yeah, they're all welcome too, the Liber people and people who are live with us on YouTube, I guess.
Great. Yeah, I'd like to say hi to everybody. Thank you all for tuning in and just supporting improv, and what we do. This lovely little art form we do. Thank
Yeah.
you.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So, Robert, you were an actor. You're an acrobat.
Yeah.
An artistic director. You're a teacher.
Yeah.
And you're an improviser.
Yes. All of these.
Yeah. Could
anything that can help pay the rent. That's what I am. So that's.
What's the artistic field where you started? What did you start with?
I started, I guess, with stand-up comedy actually when I was 18. I decided that that's what I wanted to do, and just started doing stand-up, and did that for a long time, and toured, and then I moved to San Francisco, and that's when I really got into theater.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And that's where you started with improvisation. Just after that, more or less.
Yeah, well, I did. There was always improvised things like for stand-ups, what they called improv, which was just ego, blah. And so when I first came to San Francisco, I remember the first improviser I saw was Stephen Kieran, who's one of the best improvisers I've ever seen. And he did what they did on stage was like all of us. The first time you see improv, you're like, how are they doing that? And so I continued to do stand-up, but then I just trained at Bay Area Theater Sports and also ACT, an acting conservatory in San Francisco. And I had the gymnastics background, so I also trained at the circus school in San Francisco. So I was doing all of those at the same time.
And because you started, you're here. You're the artistic director of a Scratch Theater.
Right.
The Scratch Theater has a story in the U.S. first.
Yeah. So we started Scratch Theater mid-90s. That ages me. But and the idea was always to use improv as storytelling, like not to try to be funny, but just try to be really on, like what would the character do? And so we started just working on genre study and telling stories. We used triptych at first. Yeah, so we tell 3 stories in one night, different genre, a romantic comedy, and then a first one of, let's say, a musical. And then we'd go back and do the second act of each one of those, take an intermission, go backstage and go, what was your name? What was your name? What was your name? And then we'd finish it up in the third act. So that was kind of our thing for a long time.
So one of the first things I heard you say on stage was a story to you.
Any kind of a journey, you go through something, whatever it is. It could be small, it could be big, it could be epic, but the idea of going through something and changing. And I found like with comedy-based improv, you can only tell a certain amount of stories, and then, which is fine. It's great to have that, but you can't and care about a character. And so that was my goal. Like when I first moved here, there was nobody to play with. It was like 10 years ago that could do long form. And so I kind of just was like, I just want to play with people. So I just started teaching people, to get people up and going. So
Do you need a conflict in a story? What's your
no, I don't think you need a conflict necessarily. It definitely helps. Like what we do with Scratch is tension, because tension, you just get it so tight. You can either get a laugh right after that, or you could just keep it. Just like I look at it, like a lot of times people let the tension out too soon, and you're like, it could do it Scratch, but you don't need to have, at all. Again, it matters what genre. If you're being true to the genre. So.
you still a lot with genres. Why that? Why that aspect?
Why with genres?
Yeah.
I like all art that kind of forces you into a box. You can only be in this box. It makes you so much more creative, just like what we're doing right now, right? It's like, oh God, we have to do this thing, but it's forcing us to be creative. And I love that aspect of it. I think it's amazing, that you can do that. Once you get good enough, what I hope to do with my company players is to break it open. You start blending genres, like Wes Anderson film. I mean, his films are based a lot on different types of genres coming together and come up with something new. And so that's my goal, is to learn these genres, teach them to people, emotionally lead. So.
And because you're now in Berlin, but you're from the US, does that make a difference for genres? Because there's something cultural very strong in that.
Yeah, I mean, it matters. Like if I say we're gonna do a passion noir or a film noir, some people are like, what? But usually in those cases, we usually have a conversation before the show, whether like this is what this genre is. Let's talk about that. Some people have no idea what these are, but I will say, yes, moving to Berlin, I had to learn how to, when I teach improv, no references, no slang, all these kind of things, and keep it really simple and say less with emotion, because not everybody understands. A lot of my students, English is not their first language. So if I go out there and I do Mach 5, they're lost, and I got to take care of my partner. So yeah, it was a big shift. So.
Do you, when you work with genres, what's the relationship between freedom and structure? Because you could think, okay, if it's a genre, you have a very strong framework. What you said, maybe it's too strong. How do you deal with that?
Well, improv, you're always going to make mistakes. That's just the gift of it, the wonderful gifts. So you're just always going to try to hit that. I mean, I love Buster Keaton. He's one of my favorite comedians, a silent movie star for people who want to look him up. He was just as big as Charlie Chaplin. But his idea was, he didn't try to be funny. He's like, just pick something that you want to be an expert on, whether it's a cook or whatever. And it's going to be funny if you're trying to get to that level, no matter what. So just stay with that. And that's kind of what happens with genres, because you're trying to hit them. And especially with improv, they're going to be funny if you're true to what the character is, because it's impossible to hit 100%. And that being said, we do break the genre sometimes, and it is funny with the mistakes. But it's what I like about that. I kind of look at it also because I studied Commedia dell'arte. It's just putting a mask on. And once you have a mask, actually, it gives you a freedom to play way outside of what you thought you could. Because now the mask, whatever character you're playing in that genre, gives you liberty to come up with dialogue that would have never slipped out of your mouth before. So I find freedom in genre, actually.
And you, these kind of dialogues or of lines, because you play a lot with emotions at Scratch, and it has to do with silence, I guess.
Yeah. This is like, I think there's not enough silence in a lot of improv. I sometimes I like when I can say a line and I can tell that it hits somebody, and that's that silence, like this, having a conversation. A lot of times I feel like some scene work can get way too talky, and we're just talking over each other, but nothing's landing. So we do a lot of training in Scratch of like, let the line hit, say it more than once, say it 3 times. How did that feel? And then react to it. And then you can, then characters can change, and they're not 2-dimensional. And that's great.
And you worked as a clown. Was it at the
Yes.
Cirque du Soleil or?
I did do Cirque du Soleil. I studied Chinese acrobatics and did hand balancing and yeah, the whole thing. So I did a lot of improv when I was in Cirque du Soleil with them. It was quite hard to get in. I mean, it was like a 3-day audition, and there was like probably close to 200 people there. They just give you a number. And you're just lining there and they're like, do these, do that. And you're like, oh, and so it was 3 days. And at the end, there was only 5 of us. And then they just said, congratulations, we may call you tomorrow or never. Au revoir, and that was it. But then they called me 2 days later and I was in the show. And that was pretty exciting. That was really exciting. But hard work.
You worked there as an acrobat or more?
Both, yeah. Acrobat and clown, yeah.
Okay. And you also did a workshop on clowning in
Yes.
improv. What's the specificity of it in improv?
It's a little bit different as a clown, because as a clown, you're listening for the applause of the doing the right thing. But really it comes down to trying to find a loser in you. It sounds harsh, but it's the thing that makes you empathetic or vulnerable, or strong, your strength, what your strength is. And then how to play with that. That's one way. And then if you get into if you do partner clowning, that's a different thing. That's a lot of times like the red clown and the white clown. So you can see this in a lot of different, like I look at like Dean Martin and what's his name? Jerry Lewis. That's perfect. This is an American reference, might not be able to understand, but Laurel and Hardy is another example of this. I think it's Dickendorf in Deutsch, but that's a perfect example of red clown and white clown. They can't stand each other sometimes, but they also can't stand to be away from each other, in this beautiful way. So that's what those workshops were based on, is finding a loser in you, and then also working with how do I play with my partner, just like improv. And then there's a lot of silence there and a lot of play and physicality. Yeah.
And you have these duos as a clown or with a partner in clowning, and you can also transfer it to improv when you see a character on scene going to the contrast. Is it something that you do or that you?
Yeah, so we play a lot with that of contrast. I mean, you see this so you got like this, like you can use Western even. Like how many times have we seen like the sheriff and he's all tough? He's a real tough guy. And then his deputy's like, well, go, sheriff. What do we, that is a total red clown moment. And you see this a lot in genres. They pop up a lot in every, I can see it in every genre, passion noir, easy, it's always there. But this is where we try to find, like, again, it's contrast, and low status is what we probably say in improv. You play like a low status kind of character. But really it's clown to me. It's like the same thing,
And contrast is also a contrast between scenes. Is it something you work a lot with for your shows to have comical aspects or more friendly aspects, sort of, and sympathetic aspects, or in the same story?
Yeah, I'm always pushing them to change tone. Always. That's a big thing. The number one thing is convergence. That's our thing that we train a lot on besides emotions. But then the next thing is like change that tone. If it's been super funny and fast, slow it down, and I'm sure I think a lot of groups do that, but that's really important to me too. If we do something really harsh and it's really built with tension, we better come in and send in the clowns, something just to breathe and let that out a little bit. And also just to show how versatile like the Scratch Company players are, because they can play, like I forced them to do like American century, like 20th American century plays where you stay in the same room for an hour and a half in that room and do a show. You got to find reasons to leave, but there's no cutting scenes, and that really makes you a really sharp actor as an improviser. So
the setting of your shows is looks mostly very simple. You don't, well, the music is very strong, for example, but the lightings or what you wear, it doesn't have a lot of how do you say, decorum? I don't know what's the English word would be.
Yeah.
But and it's still very. Is it a choice that helps you for the imagination, or what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like what we're doing with this radio program. I want the audience to dream. And so if we're wearing black and suddenly I'm a dragon, they see a dragon. They project that upon me. But if I'm dressed up, and I've seen this with like early on with improv, if everyone dresses up differently, and you dress, some guy's got like a big banana shirt on, it really is hard to dream or project anything on that. That's one thing. And the second is, I think once, like when we all dress up in black, that was kind of my thing, is that it really shows an ensemble. It's like there's nobody standing out, and that's something that I try to bust through the stand-up days, is that stand-ups have that ego of me, look at me. And what we're doing is like, okay, put that away. How do I make my partner look good? And I think just by the outfits, that helps as well to converge and say we're an ensemble, and we're taking it serious.
How do you make your partner look good without falling too way behind, or how do you see that?
Well, I just look at it. Well, I will say in the words, and I could show like a metaphor for it. But the idea is, if I make you look good, and if you're focusing on me looking good, then we're just going to do this. Boom, 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 boom. And pretty soon we're really improvising and playing at such a level we couldn't do if I'm driving or feel like I need to overdo something. Because then it's just me pushing this. And that won't be as exciting, I think, for the audience. And so that's what I think like is so important. And more of that, it's I see a lot of, I understand, especially when you're young and you start out, you're like, yes, but when like I'm so proud of my company players. I've seen so many of them grow in the past few years and really letting go of ego and really surrendering to each other. We got each other's backs, and that's such a great feeling. And I know it's intoxicating to watch because it's hard to find, just like a good band or a good whatever. It's like people working together on that level is always exciting.
What are you the most proud of at the end of a good show or a good evening with Scratch?
My daughter.
And on the more improvised?
Oh, on the improvise. Again, my daughter. The whole thing, everybody that's involved in it, it's gotten way beyond me. There's so many players in this that have helped me with Scratch, just in the music. And also, it's kind of cool. I started training just one person for free, and for a long time, and which was Javier, who I played with a lot. Great player, really fun to play with, and then built it into this thing. And sometimes I look out and I get kind of, it's a little bit like being a father, but in a different thing of like, wow, I built this, and there's all these people in the theater, and all these people that have grown to be such good improvisers and great storytellers. And it started with just like one person, here in Berlin. So that's really exciting. So, yeah.
And you're starting, you're having in this new era of mankind where we all only talk through computers.
Yeah.
For a short amount of time, I
hope. We hope.
We all hope. You started a new radio kind of show.
Yeah.
Improvise. So can you tell a bit about it?
Yeah. So I'm really nerdy. Like I love silent movies, and I've always loved old radio programs. And I have a good friend of mine in Los Angeles who really got me into it, named Dave Slaughter. If you're out there, hi Dave. But what I love, I've always, like, to me, it's just dreaming, like with radio programs, like they paint the picture. And luckily I've been able to work with my cast before this thing happened. So we could kind of go, okay, let's do that, but I just love that it gives you this opportunity to just sit back and go along and dream in a way. And it's kind of funny because I did this as a kid. It's funny, as an entertainer, you always go back to being a kid and doing the things. And I remember Star Wars came out, and my friends and I, we didn't have cameras or anything. Like, we want to do a Star Wars something. And all we had was like these small miniature cassette tapes, players. And so we're doing our own Star Wars movies with just like a radio program. And we couldn't figure out how to make a spaceship sound like it exploded. We finally figured out the toilet is the best way for a ship to be destroyed. So this is kind of what we're doing. I'm just taking back what I did as a kid. And the influence, or the thing that inspired me, was one of my favorite radio programs called Lights Out. It started in the 30s, mid 30s. It's really a precursor to Twilight Zone and Black Mirror. But the radio rendition, it was really quite terrifying on some of these. It was pretty dark, some of the stuff that they're dealing with. But they did a great job at creating tension. And some of these episodes, you can't believe they wrote it in the 30s. You're like, whoa, there was an audience for that? You know? And then, you know, it sounds ridiculous because it gets really dark and creepy. And then the advertisements come in and they're like, da, 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 pepper spray. And you're like, what? But yeah, so if you're nerdy and you want to check out some good radio program, I would check out Lights Out. That's really great. Or you could also listen to us. We have a show this Saturday at 8:00, and you can go to scratchtheater.com and go and watch it live as we're doing it. And we will be blinded. We won't see each other. It's just complete darkness. You probably saw the image. It's an old radio and just comes on the air just like it was a radio program.
Great. I heard the first show. It was great. I loved the effect and the fact of being listening to a time where I wasn't born, I guess.
Yeah.
Also, this kind of events that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Great. I'll open it space to all members of the Liber. I said at the same time, I'm very happy and pleased that you're here, and we have a very strong connection also because we have Teresa Mertens, which is an ensemble player of Scratch. Exactly.
She's amazing.
She's amazing, and she's a coach at the Liber, and that's great to have her
I'm glad to have her here. She's one that is just really, I've seen her grow in the last few years, and I'm so happy that she's teaching over there because she's got a lot to teach and she's a good teacher.
So you can all put your camera on, I think. Exactly. You can do it by yourself. Hello, Liliana. All of them, if you want to. And anyone with questions might ask questions. I'm checking at the same time what's happening live somewhere. Oh, I'm here. Why are you here? What's up? What?
This is the part where we're gonna have to start improvising, I think.
Yeah. Wie einfach war das? Was ist das?
Yeah.
So we are looking to the screen of Teresa. She has to close it, or someone has to close it. We are looking on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
There we go.
We're back. Yeah.
Hello. So nice.
So, anyone with questions? Joanna. Go ahead.
Hi, Robert.
Hi.
Thank you for being here tonight. I have so many questions. I'm just going to ask two.
Wow.
Or maybe just one. You said before, no, first of all, I really appreciate the way that you see improv and what you did and what you're doing, like with Scratch Theater, and we have so much fun with Teresa as well. So it's really, really cool to see improv this way. And you said something about how can you make your partner look good. So you always try to make the other look good. And we at the Liber, we play mainly with groups that come from France or other groups that have like totally different kind of way of improv. Like you said before, people with big egos or very comedian-like. And sometimes I struggle to find a way to play with them because I try to take what I learned into consideration, but I try to make them look good, but they're just like crushing me down. Do you have an advice for like things like this?
Yeah, well, those are good questions. And I also went through that early on, especially in the stand-up scene. You'd get up at the night and do improv, and it was always the loudest person, the big testosterone kind of thing. And it's really hard it's almost impossible to improvise something like that. But there are tricks that you can do to if you have improvisers who at least know the basic improv, and people have different styles, and some people are loud and go for comedy. One thing that will always be surprising to them is if you're super emotional, you'll kind of throw them off. And also you'll pull the scene, because that person might get really funny, but if you get emotion, the whole audience is like, they're going to care about you. They're going to be like, okay, what's going on with that person? So that's just one thing you can do. But I would say there's sometimes when like you just improvise and there's different styles. I'll improvise with other people and they just improvise in a different style, and I have to be okay with that. What I try to do is invite people to Scratch and say, come play and do long form and tell some stories with us. And I created Scratch purposely to get rid of ego, so that the person who usually does not speak up so loud, I pull them in. And the people who are too loud, I either have them change or I say, this is not the right place for you. Because what we're doing here is trying to surrender to story. So I'll give you a couple. One is to work on the emotional stuff. That will definitely help you try to connect with the other partner. Definitely we can get into it. There's a great Meisner techniques that you can do where you just are being honest about your partner. But the third thing is to set up that group ahead of time of people who really want to tell stories or people who just want to do comedy. I think that's probably the safest way until you get your tools. I can pretty much play with anybody because I've been doing it so long, but I needed that time to learn all those other things in storytelling, to slow things down, to trust myself, to be okay with silence. But you need a safe place to really get there.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, it's hard to answer these questions in short ways because there's so much information on each one of these. So
thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Come join us at Scratch and play sometime. Love it.
Don't pull all our players.
Oh, come on.
Etienne wanted to.
Yeah. Hi, Robert. I would have a question here, because it seems that storytelling is quite a big part of your performance, and I wanted to know, how do you train that up, and how do you practice it? How do you bring people that are maybe not best at storytelling into it?
That's a good question. First of all, I think we're all naturally great storytellers. I think that we fool ourselves and our ego goes, oh no, if I make people laugh, that's what it's about. And so I think there's a lot of ego stuff that's being played. I think that we're all born from like storytelling people. So we all have a different way of telling stories. Some might be more colorful, some might be more narrative. But first I try to break that mold, because usually the problem I have is not people with narration issues. It's about, like I said, ego or wanting more stage time, or these kind of things. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing is we do like what comes next, what happens next in the story, what makes sense. And we do a lot of games where, because as you know, like when you're doing a scene in improv, sometimes you'll have these, there's a time when I'm watching a scene and I'm like, that's bullshit. That would never happen in that situation. So we try to stop in those moments, be like, what would you actually do? And that's the beginning of real storytelling, instead of just glossing it over. Like, what would you do? And be empathetic about it. So we do a lot of games playing that, of like, someone can even ring a bell and be like, no, new choice. No one would do that in that predicament. Right. And I know you know what I'm talking about, improvisers, when you see these scenes and you're like, no, that's just corny. And it's okay, like I said, if you want to do corny, but as far as long form, you don't have to have a hero, like the hero's journey, but you have to have somebody you care about. And you have to go through that. Like you see this in movies. You have to have a character that is interesting enough to follow through. So our job is actually, as far as the narration, it should never be the lead who's thinking about narration. Us on the side, we were the ones building the road. We put in the pits, we put in the lava, we put in whatever that is. And all they should be doing is responding emotionally, what's going on. And then the storytelling takes care of itself. It's kind of, again, a long answer, but
no, it's great. Thank you.
If you want, I can also give you guys some, Therese is probably already on this, I'm sure, but I know that there's a lot of games that we play that do bump up certain narration things that you need to tell a good story. that being said, there's also great ways to break that open because there's lots of ways to tell a story. It doesn't have to be A to B, right? It can go all over the place, like a really cool abstract painting, you know. So
I add a question. Are you yourself often surprised during the show, or constantly, or how is it? Because you have so much experience.
I'm always surprised. There's always little things. Like there's never a time where you're like, oh, I mean, if I got to a point where I've got it all figured out, then I need to bow out. You know, so I'm always surprised. Obviously, from doing it for so many years, there's just like if it's music, you kind of like, okay, I know that. Oh yeah, okay. I definitely have that, but I'm surprised all the time. And especially with newer improvisers, sometimes we'll throw things in that make no sense. But that's fun. I love the justification. I love that part of it. That makes it really exciting and new. So cool. I hope that helps you a little bit. Storytelling. Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vas-y, Liliana, je te vois.
Oui, genre, mais je savais pas si je voulais pas. Bref, comme j'ai fait l'expérience d'un certain nombre de réunions comme ça en ligne où tout le monde se parlait, j'ai pris l'habitude de lever la main.
Vas-y, en anglais.
Sorry. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So my question is: so I have to admit that I never saw any of your shows, so that's probably where my question comes from. So basically, what I wonder is, do you have some time, kind of like not confrontation? That would be the wrong word, but at least do you is it always in between the people you know and you train mostly, or is it also shows with people that are not trained from the same schools, that are in a number that is sufficient that you actually get this what we have on stage that Joanna was talking about, where you have style that comes
Yeah. Right now, I've done. We've brought people in at different times for guests, but I will say it's been really hard for me being in charge of Scratch. I'm basically teaching 5 days a week. I mean, that's what I do, and so I actually would like to reach out more to play with other people, but we're so going for the next show, and what we do is so intense with the genre study that it makes it hard for other people to come in unless they've done certain things. Like I know certain players in Bay Area theater sports, if they came in and they wanted to do a screwball comedy, I know that they could pull that off. I know they got that down and we can converge. But if you haven't studied, you're right. If you haven't studied some of these genres that we're doing, it does make it harder to play with other people because they're just going to keep wrecking it because they don't mean to. They just don't know certain things of that genre. So right now we do it's really just the company, my company players, and I have moved people up and we all learn the same genres so that we're speaking the same language. And like I said, my goal is to get to the point where we know all these genres, and then that's kind of what we got to in the original Scratch theater, and we started breaking them and playing, mixing genres in this like great connection.
So then, because my experience from the improv in the format that we have with the match is that at the same time, and I think it's a little bit what Joanna was saying, there is something sometimes a bit painful about it when you're meeting with someone who clearly don't have the same language as you, and you can feel a little bit like, quite often after a show I feel like, oh my god, I'm so stupid and no one got what I had to say. But in the same time, I learned so much out of that, and I feel like this is also really the magic that there is. And I guess it's a little bit specific to the match format, because we can never fully rely on this team spirit. So I know that part of the improv, I would guess, just come from that. So I'm almost sure it's not the case, but I would be worried if when I hear this model of something that is more in between people who speak the same language, that it could end up to a point where, well, basically, where does the improvisation come after a certain time of knowing each other so well?
all you got to do is like take an onion and just peel it. There's so many layers. There's so many layers. So even though I've played with some of these people for a long time, there's always something that is always coming out, and even in myself, like totally different. But I think I hear what you're saying, and there is a thing of like, I remember early on, and I was talking to a really great improviser, and I was getting tired of theater sports. This is, I was long, like in my 20s, and I was kind of like going, oh, I'm not, that's ridiculous. This theater sports thing is driving me crazy. It's just wacky and silly. And he pulled me aside and I just had a conversation. He's like, you know what? Yeah, I know you want to tell long stories. And these were people that were doing long form. They were teaching me long form. But you have to go to do these games and these things because this is like going to do the workout, right? It's like going to the gym and you're flexing your muscle and you're meeting these people and doing these games. And you want to keep that improv spirit. And I still believe in that. What Scratch is really a vision of taking all of that and then let's tell a real story without somebody coming through the wall going, surprise! It's like, let's really tell a story. So I hear what you're saying, and I do think it's important. I do love the improv spirit, but I think that there is, I also think that people have this idea of improv has to be comedy. For whatever reason, it's got a really, especially in the States, it's much more. If you say improv, they're like, oh my God, I just think I love it. I love how, like, I love humor. I love comedy. And I just don't think it has to be like that. I think that any medium should be open to anything. Not saying that we're going to go do, some scary tragedy, kind of thing. There's always going to be humor involved, but we don't go for that. And I know like in some of these theater sports stuff that I've seen, I still see that for performance, and that's fine. There's a market for that, but I would like to see more. For me, after doing it so long, I want to push to the next thing, which is storytelling and really honest storytelling, and that using improv and those tools. So
it's funny though, because I guess if you would ask I'm kind of like I would see myself as the person who is always trying to force people to do some more serious stuff and criticizing too much comedy that we do. So I feel like I'm in a weird position right now with my questions.
No, it's not a weird place. And I appreciate. I mean, I love that they have the comedy cafe, and what they do is very specific, and they do it well. And then what we do at Scratch is just totally different, really different. So I think they're both great forums. But I do think, to answer, just to finish up on your question, I just don't think, even if you work with people for a long time, you're always going to be surprised, And we do bring people in and different guests and stuff, and that always keeps you on your toes. You're like, whoa, what's that? But there is a nice trust that you get when you work with the same people, that you can open up emotionally and actually be yourself more instead of pretending to be something else, which is really nice.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Can I still ask one question?
Sure.
Because you're talking about very general, like genuine feelings and very a lot of realness and a lot of emotions. I just keep thinking of psychodrama. I don't know if you know it from Moreno, because I just come from a therapy background, and I wanted to do that. So every time that you say stuff like, what would I change in the scene? This does not feel right. And what would a real person do? And how could I react like differently, or like being real? Have you thought about doing something with therapy, or is you're teaching therapy as well?
Do you mean like being a therapist, or
no,
you mean like
psychodrama, like using theater as a therapy method?
I know people who do that very well, but that's not really where I'm going with it at all. And I really appreciate it. I know a lot of people that do really great work on that, and I do think theater is a great way to these games and different things. There is a way to break in, and it does some wonderful things, but it's definitely just artistically running Scratch. I got enough on my plate. I don't think I can deal with any more than that. Anybody else?
C'est Clément qui lève la main. Je crois que tu peux y aller.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Roger. So, sorry. So my question is also about the fact that I never saw you play.
Mhm.
Now I'm really, I'm really interested into seeing it. But yeah, from what I understand, and I think you kind of already answered my question, but you're trying to avoid absurdity, which is like in what we do. I mean, I'm already doing for 1 year now with this with Liber, but it's many times like very absurd and very and it goes a bit crazy, and I like it too. But yeah, so my question is like, in your way of doing, you try to avoid this part and tell something that is possible, because you said that like some guys are like ringing the bell and saying like, okay, no, this is not possible. So are you always trying to keep this reality and miss and avoid absurdity?
That's a really good question. To answer that question, I like absurdity and I love that stuff. I mean, I love physical, like absurdity. That's what I love about clowning. But it has to be, I think for storytelling purposes, it has to have a reason behind it. Even good clowning, it's not just a lot of movement. Maybe it looks like that, but there has to be a purpose for it to be a good clown. And it's the same thing with absurdity. You can just be absurd to be absurd, but it's got to be a purpose for it, right? So like a perfect example is we did a show last fall. It was based on an idea about orphans from the 1930s. And so we all got to play a kid. And we had the same character. It was like a mini series. And so we had to keep track of what happened in the last episode and each other's names. Mm-hmm. But we would use, because it was really brutal, it's an orphanage in the 1930s. So then the kids' imagination is what was absurd, but it had meaning behind it because of what they're going through. And I think this is a cool vehicle for using for storytelling in the absurdity. And this is where I totally agree. Absurdity works. You know, I mean, that's what this whole show was actually, The Orphans was based on kind of my daughter, because she's kind of coming out of being like a kid into being a teen, but how beautiful it is that you can dream still and you see these things, but she's at the twilight. And so we really played with the idea of like, how does a kid see something, which is kind of, it's very improv. That's what we do as improvisers. We have to think like children again. But what I want to do is, how can I do that and make it mean something more, that it would be more layered if I can. And so I love absurdity. I really do. But it's great if it's connected to something.
Okay. Yeah, but it's much more difficult to find a connection with absurdity.
It is, but there is ways to do it. You know, it's, you know, you have to justify like, why is this happening? You know, or that's the reality. Like we did Twin Peaks improvised, and the idea there is like David Lynch. It's just like we made up our own reality, whatever it is. Instead of reacting to it, that's just the reality, and don't react to it. And then it's like, ooh, then it's really creepy, right?
Yeah, it's a very good example, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Last question, maybe for Hugo.
Hi.
Go.
Yep. Hi.
Hi. I love all our different perspectives. It's like camera up, camera down. Someone's in a bucket. It's like. It's cool.
So I wasn't there at the beginning, so I didn't hear all of your background. So maybe you won't feel comfortable answering my question, but I feel like from what I've heard that for you, what's really important in improv and is narration and having a coherent story between characters that express feelings that seems like some reaction people might have in real life. And I'm also really interested in narration, and I was wondering if you also wrote screenplay in your life as an artist, and if you feel like doing improv theater and kind of directing, but more giving advice to artists, to improvisers, can help to the building of a screenplay, because it shows you new way to interact and to react in very sincere and genuine way to inputs by other relatives in a specific kind of situations. So how can be linked traditional theater and improvisational theater by the medium of narration, which is common to both.
So make sure I have the question right. Thank you. First of all, so you're saying can I use the tools as an improviser to make a screenplay? Is that
what you've seen from your experience by directing improv?
I have written a screenplay, but I never did anything with it. But I also wrote and directed a circus show in San Francisco called Habitat, where I used all of the improv stuff to create. That's how I did the writing, was through movement and improvisation. There's a great, we also play a game called 6 Lines. And this is, I actually have the book right next to me. That's amazing. This is by Jeffrey Sweet. It's called The Dramatist Toolkit. I'm just trying to get my camera on there right, sorry. But he basically, used improv to write dialogue, because what we do as improvisers, it's so much more natural than what can ever, for most part, for what most people can write. So there's a great game called 6 Lines. We do it all the time. And I can talk to you, Denis, later about it, how to play it. But this is a great way for narration. It's a great way to just say what needs to be said, and for natural dialogue to come out. And you can go through the book, but they've written many screenplays this way. So yes, you can use improv, and you can use it for a lot of amazing things for screenplay.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes authors of TV shows or movies, they just tend to copy others' dialogue from other movies, and they just create a loop around the artistic circle. And sometimes movies I really liked, I learned that the author not the author, but the actor tried to incorporate a lot of improvisation in it, and try to be in the skin of the character, and to have to try different reaction to different situations. So
I know for myself, this is where I had a hard time on stage acting in the repertoire theaters. When I did that, there wasn't a lot of room for improvisation. And it never felt as fresh as like improv, like when you're doing it. So I love it. Like I've done a couple movies, and when they say just go with it, with that character, the dialogue just comes out, and it feels so much more natural. And so I agree. I think improv is a better way, actually, for some. I think we're all wired different. Some people are just better writers, but definitely you can use this to create whatever you want, whether it's a sketch or a dramatic play. There's no reason.
I think we can end on this note, that you can use improvisation for whatever, and it would be actually a good idea.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks a lot, Robert.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And let me know if you guys ever you need anything. I think you're in good hands. Teresa's over there, and you couldn't be in better hands. She's over there.
Thanks a lot, Robert.
All right.
I cut the YouTube feed.
Okay, great. Awesome. Great. If you guys want to tune in on Saturday for our show, we'll see how it goes. As we said, we're making it up. So thank you for taking the time.
I guess if we...
Saturday, 8 p.m., you said?
Yeah. You can find us on scratchtheater.com.
All right. Okay. I was about to ask the website, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Scratchtheater.com.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.